fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Mr. Michael Hawley back. First show for you in the new year.
I know it. I'm excited, and especially with this particular guest. So it's down my alley, so I love this.
And that's a pretty dark alley.
True. That is true.
Pretty dark and dirty alley. So, well, anyway, it's good to have you back. And here we go. We'll get this going. So now the book, it's called The Last Dance of Mary Kelly, and the author is E. David Brown. So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you.
Nice speaking with you, David.
David, let's start with this. What drew you to write this book, kind of focused on this subject?
Kind of a long story. Actually, I began it in 1985. I was working at a place, and I knew as long as I was doing something in the cafeteria and writing, they thought I was doing something work-related. And I wrote it, and I was teaching at the same time, and I actually lost the manuscript. I had written maybe 120 pages longhand on both sides of legal pad. Lost it years later when I'm throwing away my lecture notes. I discovered it at the bottom of the box, and I read the first 40 pages, and I said, oh, maybe there's something there. Read the next 40 pages, and I said, it's going somewhere. Read the next 60 pages, and I said, maybe I should just keep the first 5. And from there, I was interested in the labor movement, the women's labor movement in the 1880s in England, particularly the mill strike, and which actually took place in northern England. And I said, what if I were to cast the women not as prostitutes, but as people who were involved in the labor movement? And that it took off from there.
So Mary Kelly, now she was the last or the final victim, they say, of the Jack the Ripper and that. So let's talk about the premise of the book. And so people that don't know what the book's about, what's the basic storyline here?
Well, the basic storyline is an American journalist who had ridden with the Daltons and actually ends up almost getting hung, is commissioned to go to England and do a story on Stanley's expedition to find the Emin Pasha in Africa, and he's commissioned to go and to the Royal Geographical Society, but he gets there and nobody will let him in. So he ends up going to Whitechapel and discovering certain events are taking place there, and starts investigating what's going on there. Coming in contact with Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, Annie Besant, who was was one of the major labor activists in the 1880s. Richard Burton, Sir Richard Burton, the explorer of the Nile, and a Jewish soldier by the name of Perez, who goes underneath the moniker of Perkins to hide his identity.
I was just going to ask what point of view you're writing this from. Like, where's the reader getting it from? Like, what point?
It's an omniscient third person. The American journalist kind of represents the naivete of Western America at that time, and all the various viewpoints are coming into play. So I would have to say that, there's not authorial intrusion. It's seen through the eyes of each character as to what's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the New York Tribune, because one of the people I write about was the New York Tribune's London correspondent. His name was George W. Smalley, and he had made a comment about the suspect that I do is Francis Tumblety. So it's kind of a fun thing. I enjoy when I found out that you're using Tribune. That was I liked that part. That was kind of a connection.
Well, also Stephen Crane had written for it for the Tribune, and I thought it would be funny to have this wannabe great journalist who's really kind of second rate, constantly, being reminded of Stephen Crane.
He lost his thumb with the Daltons, right?
Well, yeah, the character Bryson Ward loses his thumb when the sheriff slams a door on his thumb and feeds it to a dog.
I tell you, when I read that, it was like, That's a first twist. That is a definite twist. So,
Thank you. It's later in the book for a certain reason.
So your dialogue, how do you come up with the dialogue between your characters? Like, how do you experience characters as you write them?
Well, when I start off writing a book, I pretty well have thought of it through all the way to the end. Then I go back and I do a character analysis, and I try to establish what the dialogue should be, so that readers don't have to hear, he said, she said, whatever. And then I go on, and in the case of the historical figures, I look at their quotes, their comments, how they actually spoke in order to establish dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you really take into account what's going on in the city or country that you're writing about too, right? Because then it kind of gives you more of a feel, almost like the setting is a character. Do you feel that too, or?
I think the setting is always a character, but that may be because I come from a certain Southern tradition in literature, where the atmosphere itself often defines the action and the character.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It makes it more realistic in a way. A lot of writers miss out on that. And so, do you have a subtext? Is there something you want people to take away from this story? I know it's fictional and it's entertainment, but is there something that maybe arose from putting this story out?
Well, a couple of things. I would say one of the things that arose is just the media's role certain times in exacerbating situations or even contributing to negativity. The guy Purkis was an actual character, as Michael would know, who published basically a yellow tabloid in London. He was virulently anti-Semitic, virulently anti-Irish. So I'm trying to bring this into play to show how, in some ways, it's almost mirrored in some respects as to what's going on in society, not only in Canada, but more particularly in the U.S. And the other thing was I didn't want the women to be prostitutes. I wanted them to be presented as actual human beings, individuals working to some sort of resolution or greater good. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does in a way. I think that so you took the woman's role like away. You give them an occupation that was, let's say, more respectable than what prostitutes were at the time.
Well, precisely, yeah.
So now I was just curious about, in your book, did you make a point that the press was saying that they were prostitutes, and then that was something that?
Well, actually, Purkis did allude to that in his newspaper, but more importantly, there was a government official who was one of the police inspectors who had, in order to calm, well, you know this, Michael, in order to calm I guess we'd call the established gentry or, polite society, he had said that the women were basically low-caste people.
Right. And then, yeah. And then, of course, there's a lot more to that. A lot of detail goes on, but I just kind of enjoy that. You kind of remind me of Holly Rubinold, who was trying to say that they were not prostitutes. Well, I mean, they were. There were unfortunates, actually. But the thing I really like about it is just like you said, you're humanizing them.
That's what I was attempting to do.
You're giving a story to it.
Well, in Canada, we had a situation, I don't know if you know about it, but there was a guy in British Columbia, and he was basically murdering Native people, Native women. And the police had overlooked it and whatnot because they were prostitutes. And that kind of came into play about how the victims are often overlooked because of where they stand in society.
Oh, yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, I think we've seen that a lot in a lot of societies, and depending on the temperature of politics at the time, because any time someone's looked upon, if they're a prostitute, even the gay society, there's a lot of areas of the public that don't really get the let's say justice or support that they should when they're under attack.
That's kind of why I portrayed Oscar Wilde in a more kind of active role and portrayed him. Well, he actually had a blue in boxing where he went to university, and to try to do away with stereotypes and portray them as individuals in their own right.
Does that I don't want to say worry you, but does that kind of bring up concern on how people will take that? Because in today's society, you can do anything that's maybe you're trying to make. Not trying to make, but you're presenting your victims as being more humanized, but then, with society would call it more woke, how that stuff is going on. And
no, I didn't intend it to be woke at all. In fact, some of the reviews have kind of disturbed me about, great reviews about, here's a champion against white colonialism and all that. No, that wasn't the intention. I'm writing a piece about what society was like in the 1880s. No, there was no intention of actually going in that direction. How it's perceived, I basically can't control that.
Yeah. I just know that when I've written some things before, and I know I cover certain murders in certain areas on certain members of society, and you try to present them as human first and think of it this way rather than what we label people. And I know I still have backlash on some of those books.
Look, I wrote a book years and years ago called Tell You All, a story about Lazarus. Lazarus returns from the dead. And the book of John, it says he returns from the dead, and he's in the thirds, and he's decaying. He stank, I think is what it says in John. And I said, what if I take and write an ending where Lazarus is actually the one who's resurrected, and deal with society in Judea at that time and portray the Roman soldiers as kind of the grunts in Vietnam, that they don't know why they're there, they just know they want out. And I got a lot of backlash. But it didn't concern me because it was the idea that intrigued me. I didn't really care about how people perceived me.
So, David, when in there, it looks like that you have all the canonic five that we have in the Whitechapel murders, but that they all knew each other. And is that how you have it set up?
Do you mean the victims?
Yes.
Yes, I do have it set up that way. Except for in the beginning of the book, the women who are not part of the canon enter into it.
Martha Tabram and Emma Smith?
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay. So, which is interesting. And then I see that you started with Mary back in, was it Wales or?
In Ireland.
Ireland? Oh, okay, in Ireland, okay. And then interestingly, some of the only information we have with Mary Kelly came from her live-in boyfriend, Joseph Barnett. And then, but you have a character named Charlie Barnett. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Exactly, yeah. I like the name. It was quite simply that, and I knew he might have been a pimp, I think from other things I had read. You would have more knowledge than I did, but in my cursory research, I thought that he had been mentioned as perhaps being a procurer. Yeah,
what they have is in the coroner's inquest, he was the one that was speaking, and that they were together for a little under 2 years. But since then, there were some people that were considering him as the Whitechapel murderer.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
So many people have claimed to, or authors and historians who are far more accomplished and knowledgeable than I am, have, basically said who they think the Whitechapel murderer was. And I think the only one not on that list is Queen Victoria.
Yeah, that's right. Just her surgeon or her physician was. That's it.
Yes.
And her grandson. Yeah, that's right.
Well, give another 50 years, the way things are going, she'll be the prime suspect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What was the biggest challenge, do you think, for you in putting together this book?
Establishing the identity of each character and trying to keep away from. Look, I'm not a mystery writer. I admit that. I wasn't even attempting to write a mystery, but to make it believable. I think that's the main thing. Make it believable, make the atmosphere, people be able to see London in the 1880s. I think one person once said, I would rather be in the black hole of Calcutta than living in Spitsville.
Yeah.
So that was a fun part, doing the research, the sociological research. There was an American sociologist who had, I guess we wouldn't call him a sociologist then, but he had written an entire paper on the conditions of Whitechapel and how to improve it, and basically nothing came about from it. I just wanted to I think that was a real challenge, was making the area itself, the setting, believable, and not some kind of horror, Hammer mystery type thing, Hammer film.
I believe you made a connection with New York City's Five Points area, which is actually very good, definitely.
Yes, yeah. I wanted to show the similarities in the denial. In fact, in the beginning of the book, Morris Breck says that there's another story going on in Philadelphia in the city of brotherly love, about somebody killing nuns. So I guess I was trying to say that the situation was no different in North America than it was in England. It was just that this grabbed the world's attention more so. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and even in May of 1888, there was a Bowery prostitute that was murdered Ripper style.
Yeah,
and of course, Tumblety was there at the time. So, but that really captured the attention, and I also think it was because, of course, when they wrote the Dear Boss letter, and the police wanted people to see the handwriting, and they put that Dear Boss letter in the papers. Of course, the moniker Jack the Ripper came out, and once that happened, boy, did it! I mean, it was international sensation.
Exactly. I think one of the kind of interesting parts about the Whitechapel murders is, there was H.H. Holmes, there was Crippen, there were all these guys who I kind of bring into it as an aside toward the end of the book. But I think the real thing was, who would know that this would take on a life of itself? I think the kind of corrupt policeman at the end of the book says, who's going to remember these 5, whores 10 years from now, or even next year, or even remember the name Jack the Ripper? And it's become part of legend.
So I think, Al, what's going on here is there was a suspect, Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, who went to McGill University, where David went to. So I think there's a connection, David. I want to know about that.
I think I was living in B.C. at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you put this together, how does this whole process of writing these stories and doing the research and now actually getting it published, how does that change or affect you?
Not particularly.
Doesn't it?
No, I'm 73 years old, and I had been writing and had my glory days when I was in my 20s and 30s and publishing and stuff. To me, I enjoy the process, and I'm glad people like it. I don't think it's going to change anything outside of it's going to drive me to write something else.
Well, there you go. Well, and so that leads me to have you got something else planned, or are you going to do something else now, or?
I have. It's interesting you mentioned. Somebody said, "Oh, you leave the book open at the end. Are you going to pursue another Bryson Ward story?" I hadn't even thought about that. That really wasn't on. Wasn't in my mind. I have been researching.
Because he was supposed to go to Chicago. Is that what you had set up to go to H.H. Holmes?
H.H. Holmes Hotel. And I just thought that was funny at the end, kind of an aside. But I've been researching about the Battle of the Aleutians, which a lot of people don't know about. It was the only time the Japanese actually landed on North American territory. And I have this idea in my story about these unprepared American troops who thought they were going to Hawaii, who end up in the Aleutians fighting the Japanese. And there's kind of an element of a mystery or something of that nature involved. So I've been doing a lot of research on the Battle of the Aleutians. It's called the Forgotten Battle.
So if you pick up Bryson Ward again and you run with him in another book, do you have, this is a weird question, but do you sort of have a voice a Bryson in your head or an image of what he would look like?
Bryson has to change. Bryson starts off in the first novel as kind of this, cocky American journalist who's really kind of naive. And at the end of the book, he has to come to a realization that you have to serve more than just as a purveyor of information. There has to be something greater. So Bryson has to take on a new personality. He has to become, rather than an observer, an active participant because of what he's gone through. In the first book, he isn't. He's more of a passive person in the first book, in the Mary Kelly book. So I keep working with the voice of how do you do that? How do you bring this character, who really was a sub-character compared to the other characters, up front to where he establishes his own identity?
When in doubt, just kill someone.
Yeah, I've heard that works, I think I killed 5 people, but...
Well, I was curious because when I was reading that, it kind of reminded me of, again, not actual events with the New York World, that Nellie Bly was that female correspondent that just 1 year later did that 72 days around the world. I was thinking, I bet you could do something with that.
She wrote a book called 10 Days in a Madhouse, where she had herself committed to a mental hospital in New York in order to write about the conditions in I guess we'll call them insane asylums at that time, which really led to kind of a societal look at the situation and trying to improve the conditions. Nellie Bly is a phenomenal journalist.
Ooh, so you are going to write about her?
I might one day, because that book, 10 Days, 10 Days in a Madhouse, is it's a short piece, and I think I forget what newspaper it was published in, but it's really a strong piece of writing.
Well, in New York, she was part of the New York World. I wonder if that was it.
That was probably it, yeah. And she had herself committed. And actually, I think her publisher had to bail her out because they really thought she was insane.
Oh, Joseph Pulitzer. Yeah.
Joseph. And it's called 10 Days in a Madhouse. I thought, well, she would be a phenomenal. In fact, who knows? Maybe she and Bryson Ward can meet up.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you, Michael.
See, Al? I'm getting his book.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, listen, do you like to interact with readers, fans, people that are interested in the subject, or even Jack the Ripper and your books? And if you do you have social media? Do you have a website? How do you like to interact with people, or do you not?
My publicist has established a website. I admit I'm kind of a Luddite, the basic, I come from the era of stone tablets and chisels. People are saying I should go in that direction. I've really never thought about it. I enjoy the process. As I said, at my age, I'm more interested in the outcome than the income of things.
Yeah, well, you take what's fulfilling for you, right? And that's all that matters.
And I hope it reaches people and people find something in it they can identify with,
Oh, I'm sure they will. Now, what we'll do is we'll get your website up. We'll get everything pertaining to the book so people can find it easily with one click when they listen to the show or check out the website. Well, we appreciate talking to you today, and we're glad you came here to talk about your new book. It's The Last Dance of Mary Kelly. E. David Brown, thank you.
I'm glad you invited me. Thank you.
Great speaking with you, David.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.